To the first voyage, the Bark Endeavour and the Transit of Venus. Those of you who can see there will see this description here is actually in French. And I put it there for a couple of reasons. I guess I'm a bit of a francophile. Those who may have heard me do a talk on the French explorers of Nouvelle-Hollande. The information and what Cook did generated a lot of interest. And when I was looking through some stuff, as I often do, you come across stuff in German, in Portuguese, in Spanish about Cook's trip and Cook himself. So his abilities and the interest in him seems to be European-wide. And I guess also when I talk about these things and discoveries and things, I am clearly talking in a European context. I mean, it'd be naive to say Cook discovered Australia. Cook was the first European to hit the East Coast. In more ways than one, as we'll find out as we go along. So let me just be absolutely clear on that. Okay, the Royal Society was keen on the transit of Venus. The transit of Venus, as Venus passes in front of the Sun over about a 6-hour period, transits occur every 243 years with pairs of transits 8 years apart. The 1761 transit didn't yield good results. The idea was the distance from the Moon to the Sun, from the Earth to the Sun, and trying to understand the size of the solar system. Again, natural philosophy. The Royal Society decided they wanted to do something, and they were going to do Norway's North Cape, Hudson Bay in the South Pacific. The Royal Transit Society approached the admiralty ship, King George III, chipped in £4,000, which was a lot of money, and the South Pacific place they chose, as we'll see, was Tahiti. And from a European perspective, Tahiti was a new thing. It had been discovered by Wallis, another Englishman, on the Dolphin some years before, shortly before, I should say. So the Royal Society wanted Captain Campbell as the captain of this vessel and this expedition. He was well regarded as a sailor and a scientist. He refused. He decided that it was not in his career advancement opportunity or whatever. It was then a fellow called Alexander Dalrymple wanted the gig. He was a civilian, he was a very well-connected fellow, he was very good at politics, and he was doing pretty well. However, the Admiralty would not have a civilian in command of a Navy ship. They'd tried it once before and it was a complete disaster. In fact, to quote the Admiralty, a civilian in charge as commander was, quote, totally repugnant to the rules of the Navy. So he had no hope. He said he didn't really want it anyway, which wasn't true. But it was offered to Cook on the 12th of April 1768. Cook is now a 40-year-old lieutenant. No one knew why or how he was given it. However, Palliser knew for some time. Again, I come back to this ability of Cook to have people who liked what he did and nurtured him along without Cook being sycophantic or whatever. So the Royal Society weren't too happy about this Lieutenant Cook. They wouldn't give him any money to do the observation, and Charles Green was the first observer. However, eventually Cook was going to receive £100 as the second observer. They were going into the Pacific. They were going to Tahiti. The Admiralty referred to the Pacific as the Spanish Lake. They didn't know much about this Pacific place, and they wanted to learn more clearly. So they loaded up to go to sea. We'll talk about that in a minute. They loaded up 2 greyhounds, 3 cats, 17 sheep, 4 pigs, 24 hens, and a famous goat. And the goat was famous because it was about to do its second world circumnavigation. It had gone with Wallis before, and its job, or her job, she was a lady, was to give milk for the officers. And she survived the Endeavour trip and was pensioned off at Greenwich as a pensioner with a Latin inscription on her collar by Samuel Johnson. Where are we? So, talk about scurvy for a minute. Scurvy was the scourge of world navies that went seafaring in long distances. Scurvy killed more people than British naval battles or British seamen. And from what I've read and what I understand, and one of my colleagues has a slightly different view, Cook didn't know what caused scurvy. Lind had already proven it was vitamin C, but Cook, being before the mast himself, understood the need for fresh food, because if you eat well, you feel well, and so I would suggest that Cook really avoided scurvy rather than treated it. I think Banks took some vitamin C or concentrated citric acid on board to help him. But he thought hygiene and warm clothes were the key. And again, he stopped frequently to improve the food for his men, and that helped. Of course, when they go into the Pacific, longitude was a problem. They didn't have any other clock. They didn't have Harrison's clock, but they did on the other voyages. Okay. Now, I'm talking to members, so I probably don't need to go into this, but I'll do it quickly.
Yeah.
Love this picture. Love this picture. HMB Endeavour, an ex-collier. Now, as I said, Cook cut his teeth on these sort of ships in Whitby, so he was no stranger to these vessels. She is 32 metres long, weighs 366 tonnes, she has 29 kilometres of rope, she has 750 blocks, each with a specific name, by the way. She has 28 sails, about 930 square metres or 10,000 square feet. And we all know this is the one that good old Bondi built. Her particular attributes were that she was very strong. She was flat-bottomed, so they could explore in shallow waters, and she was easy therefore to careen and to look after. And she had ample storage space, because when they left town, they didn't know how long they were going to be away. So storage space was important. I'm sure everyone been on the Endeavour out there?
Yes,
Yeah, just so cool. I love those little cabins. Each number of the locks have the three-man symbol of the Isle of Man. They know which locks had the symbol and which locks didn't. That's the level of detail in that ship. Absolutely superb. And as you can imagine, circumnavigation. I have actually been on this vessel, as a number of people have. I think that's just an amazing picture to understand what the men on this ship did 250 years ago and where they went and what they achieved without having a nice cup of tea and scones and jam and cream at the end of the day. Joseph Banks. No discussion of the first trip would be complete without mentioning Joseph Banks. He was 25 years old when he joined the Royal Society's appointee. He studied botany in Oxford. He kicked in £10,000. It's about $1.5 million in today's money. Banks and Cook got on pretty well from day one. They both had a common background in Newfoundland, where Banks would go botanising. I love that word. And he botanised every chance he got. One of the things he didn't like particularly was taking orders from what he quoted a mere sea captain. And he used to complain about it 25 years later. But nonetheless, he brought on his entourage on board: Solander, Sporing, Parkinson, Buchan, all artists, all highly educated men. Some people thought this was the best seagoing scientific expedition that had ever been mounted. He was very good, he was very political, he was very adroit at taking credit where it may or may not have been due. He was close to the king and so on. And that caused a little trouble later, and we'll come to that. As you can see, time has done him no damage at all. He obviously ate well. Cook's first voyage. The orders for this voyage were: 1, pay the crew 2 months' wages in advance. I would have thought that was highly unwise, but nonetheless. Proceed to Madeira to buy stocks of wine for the voyage. Proceed to Tahiti to observe the transit. Only when the transit was done was he to open his secret orders, and that was to look for the great southern continent. If unsuccessful in finding it, to chart New Zealand as reported by this chap Tasman, and bring back some information on New Zealand. They put the seed September 1768. He did some interesting things. He instigated an 8-hour watch system so that his men could have 8 hours off, because it was going to be tough where they were going and they needed their sleep. And he decided that was the best way to do it. He expected a high level of efficiency from his men. He expected a high level of discipline from his men. Remember, he was before the mast himself in the collier, so he had a clear understanding of what needed to be done and when it needed to be done. Trained his men pretty hard, especially trained them aloft, because they really didn't know what they were going to get in the Spanish Lake, the Pacific. So in the Canary Islands, they took on 1,200 gallons of beer, 1,600 gallons of spirit, and 3,032 gallons of wine. The men got a gallon of beer. It was small beer, so I guess we call it low alcohol beer, but still a gallon, or a pint of rum in 2 tots each day. It's reckoned that the crew were half drunk the entire voyage, but they managed to survive. And there are reports of one particular chap, a Marine I think, got hold of a bottle of rum and died as a result. So they were pretty keen on the grog. In Rio here, he'd had some trouble. They went into to reprovision and to set things to rights, and they were regarded by the governor as spies because it didn't look like a military ship, and clearly they were in league with his enemy, the Jesuits. It was eventually sorted out, and they were able to move on. So they arrived in Tahiti in April 1769. They were instructed to behave properly with the local people. Each group took some time to come to grips with the others. The local attitudes to sexual relations were very different, and the sailors and Banks thought that was pretty good. Cook did not take advantage of that situation. He would not go with the local women. He refused, and we'll come back to that later on. The Polynesian society was very complex, and the religion was very complex. Banks didn't help matters much, and Cook had to smooth a few things out. He was pretty good at that, of getting to know these people and building some sort of level of rapport. So they do the observation of Venus on the 3rd of June 1769, then they head to New Zealand. They sight New Zealand on the 17th of October 1769. Banks immediately announces that they've found the Great South Land and they're wonderfully famous people. Cook says, no, we haven't. This is not a large landmass. This is something much smaller, I can tell, because of the way the swell is coming. Naturally, Cook was right. They did the circumnavigation. They proved it was 2 islands. He produced a chart. Again, a chart given it's 250 years ago, ladies and gentlemen, a chart of remarkable accuracy. A great skill and a great gift. So he's done that. He now heads west and he leaves New Zealand on the 31st of March 1770. He reaches the east coast and sights Point Hicks of Australia on the 19th of April 1770 and heads north. He's in Broken Bay on the 29th of April 1770. He works his way through the Great Barrier Reef and they run aground on the 11th of June 1770. Now just for a moment, just think about it, that the Endeavour has 94 people on board who are probably the best travelled men in the entire world. They have seen more of the world than any other person. They know about a coral reef. It's 50, 20, 200 kilometres, nautical miles, I don't know. That's what they are. This thing's 1,000. These men must have wondered what in God's name they'd struck and where they were going to go and how they were going to get out of it. They struck the reef. Banks comments in his journal the professional nature of the men, and there was no panic, and they simply tried to work out what they could do and how they could solve it. And one of the ways they solved it, and again this attests to Cook's quality as a man manager on this voyage particularly, a young midshipman by the name of Monkhouse says, "Sir, why don't we fother it?" And Cook goes, I'm paraphrasing as I go, "A little hit, what's that?" And what they do is they put a sail around the hole in the ship and they pack it with gunk and stuff, and the pressure of the water pushes the sail against the boat to stem the flow. And they will get the pumps going, and Cook listened to this young man, and his brother was the surgeon, by the way, Monkhouse. He listened to this young man, and they managed to get to Endeavour Reef, and you probably heard they were there for some time, and they managed to fix it. The other thing with all these trips to remember is they had to do it all themselves. There were no Bunnings. They had to do everything themselves. They had to get the timber, they had to fashion it, they had to set up forges to do ironwork. Everything had to be done, and they were able to do it, and they got away. When they arrived in Batavia on the 11th October 1770, the talk in the ship was how much healthier the Endeavour crew looked to Batavia. Batavia, as you may know, had it was a Dutch settlement. They built canals to make it look like home. It was a great place for the mosquitoes. The ship was in dry dock, and the Dutch shipbuilders, who were world-class shipbuilders at the time, said that it was a miracle he'd made it to Batavia. The ship was so tired. Batavia, as I said, malaria, typhoid, cholera. Cook, Banks, Solander all get ill, but they recover. The first death was Monkhouse, the surgeon, ironically enough. By the time they got back to the UK, of 94 men, 38 had died. He had 21 men flogged, 6 twice. Cook, this is his first command, remember? So Cook is worried about the Admiral think of the deaths, the floggings, and treatment with local people and so on. It turns out that the floggings were below average for a 3-year voyage, and that the fact that Batavia that was a death trap was well known. One sailor, Matthew Cox, tried to sue Cook for unjustifiable cruelty. It was thrown out. Wrong button, sorry. So now we're back at the Admiralty. Cook has a lot of work to do. They arrive on the 16th of July 1771. Cook has to write up his notes. He has to prepare the charts from all his notes and finalise all the work he's got to do. Meanwhile, Banks is feted like a rock star around town, telling everybody it's his journey, he's responsible for it all, etc., etc. However, at the same time, he treats his fiancée, Harriet Bossett, badly. He pays her off, so they are no longer engaged. He is then regarded by society as a moneyed ingrate, and his stocks are going down. Meanwhile, Cook's are going up. The Admiralty give Cook a very positive view of a review of his journey and tell him he's done well. He's presented to the King, and he spends an hour with the King. He's promoted to commander. Now, I quote one of the most famous Cook biographers, a New Zealander by the name of John Beaglehole, and he says the first voyage rounded Cook. He left a very competent technician and returned a mature, more rounded and intellectually curious individual. He departed from England a good sailor, a first-rate marine surveyor and an able mathematician. He returned a great commander, a great discoverer, and a man with a greatly heightened sense of the scope of human thought. I think that's probably gilding the lily a little, but certainly it proved the man's skills and ability as a commander of a ship, as a cartographer and an explorer. I don't think there's any question about that. Meanwhile, the Admiralty are planning a second voyage. Banks wants to command it. He gets hold of the ship and he builds a whole lot of stuff on it to make life easier. The Admiralty then say, no way, Jose. We'll sing to Cook and we'll give it to Cook. And here's the resolution of the adventure. And he strips all this paraphernalia off because they took it to sea as from sea trials and it was just horrible. It didn't work at all. Well, Banks isn't included this time. They had a father and son scientists, Johann and George Forster. People say were worse than Banks in terms of getting on with. Crew were hard to get hold of because he'd lost so many on the first voyage. People were thinking that he was an unlucky commander. Cook also said the officers were not allowed to take servants, so they weren't too happy. But eventually they got a crew and they left on the 27th of June 1772. And here's a picture of the Resolution. It was a good ship, it was well founded, they were very happy with the way it swam, as they called it, which is a lovely term for a ship, and very much like Endeavour. He was very keen on hygiene again. The ultimate punishment, of course, was to stop grog if your hands weren't clean. So I imagine sailors spent a lot of time cleaning their hands. Here's the second voyage. He has the H4 chronometer this time. But he's something like 122 days at sea with no sight of land and sailed straight into the Bay of New Zealand. He was a few years ago. No Google, just does it. Just remarkably skilled. They go into the Antarctic Circle, the first ship to do so, we believe. They're from the 30th of October to the 31st of June, 62 days in and out of there with only 2 moon sightings. They had no idea where they were. They had no idea what the conditions were like. They talk about islands, which were icebergs, and how dangerous they were. It's reported that Cook was a little more difficult to get on with on this second voyage. He got ill at one stage, retired to his cabin. They thought he was going to die, rheumatic fever or a parasite or something. One of the officers had a pet dog on board. They killed the dog and fed Cook the meat, and that became good. That upbringing and that biggin in Yorkshire made him very tough. But he came good. They're back to Tahiti from down the deep south, and as you can imagine, that was pretty exciting. The Resolution appears to have been a fairly happy ship during this time. He's away 3 years and 18 days and only lost 4 men, and only one of those to sickness. So they're into the Southern Ocean. They've proven there's no great continent. The new charts of the Pacific. On his return, he's made post captain. That's a strategically important promotion. It means that one day he will be an admiral, assuming enough fall off the perch on top of him. He now has 3 living children, by the way, and we'll come to that a little bit later. James 12, Nathaniel 11, and Hugh. His family are well off, if I can use that term. They're secure financially as a result of these things. So that's something he didn't have to worry about, but it influences him, we'll see.